Cole Merrick stood on the porch of his ranch, the sky boiling black above the Wyoming plains. Lightning split the clouds like a whip, lighting up the valley for half a heartbeat before plunging it back into darkness. The rain came hard, hammering the roof and hissing in the dirt. His hounds were restless, pacing the porch boards, their ears pricked toward the road that wound through the cottonwoods below. He could hear it, something coming. Wagon wheels slow and grinding, heavy in the mud. No one traveled this far out in a storm unless they were desperate or dangerous. Cole reached for the rifle leaning beside the door and waited. The sound grew louder. Then through the rain, a lantern swung like a ghost's eye and a covered wagon lurched into view. The horses were soaked. The driver hunched under a dripping hat. When he pulled the team to a stop in front of the porch, the wagon let out a groan like it was dying. Cole stepped down, boots sinking into the muck, the rain soaking through his shirt. The driver turned toward him, face half hidden by shadow. "You Merrick?" Cole nodded once. "Who's asking?" The man gestured toward the wagon. "Got something that belongs to you. Or will." Before Cole could speak, the driver yanked open the canvas flap. Inside sat a young woman, wrists bound with rope, her dress muddy and torn. She didn't look at either of them, her gaze fixed somewhere far away like she'd left her soul out there in the rain. The man grunted. "Name's Lydia Hale. Her pa said you'd agreed to take her. Said you'd been told the truth." Cole frowned. "What truth?" The man spat into the mud. "She's barren, useless as a mule without legs. Doctor says she'll never give a man a son. That's why her folks are done feeding her. You said you'd take her in, didn't you?" Cole's jaw clenched. He hadn't agreed to any such thing, but he saw the girl's shoulders flinch at the words. She looked young, too young for the hollows in her face. When she finally glanced up, lightning flashed and he saw her eyes. Pale green, steady through the storm. They were the kind of eyes that had known cruelty and learned to survive it. "I don't buy people," Cole said slowly, lowering his rifle but keeping his distance. "And I sure as hell don't keep slaves," the man sneered. "Don't matter what you call it. She's got nowhere else. Family's name is Ash 'cause of her. Pa says she's your problem now. You paid enough for that, didn't you?" Cole's eyes narrowed. "I didn't pay a damn cent." The driver scowled, threw a small wet satchel onto the ground and turned to leave. "Suit yourself, but don't bring her back. Hales are done with her. She's cursed." He climbed onto the wagon, flicked the reins, and disappeared into the night. The sound of the wheels faded, swallowed by the storm. Cole stood there for a long time, the rain pelting his hat brim. The girl still sat in the wagon, soaked, silent, staring at the mud. "You coming out, or you plan on drowning in there?" he said finally. She blinked, hesitated, then stepped down. She was small, her hands shaking, but there was something stubborn in the way she straightened her back. Her bare feet sank into the mud, and when she stumbled, Cole instinctively reached to steady her. She flinched from his touch. "All right," he said quietly, drawing his hand back. "Ain't gonna hurt you. Name's Cole Merrick. You can stay here till you figure where to go next." "I've got nowhere," she whispered. "Then you stay as long as you need." He opened the door to his cabin. The dogs barked once, then backed away as the girl stepped inside. The room was lit by a single oil lamp, its flame trembling in the draft. The smell of pine smoke hung in the air. She stood there dripping, eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. Cole took off his hat, set it on the peg, and poured her a tin cup of coffee. "Ain't warm, but it'll help." She stared at it for a moment before taking it with both hands. Why what? "Why help me?" Cole looked into the fire, his face lined and unreadable. "Because I know what it's like to be thrown away." The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. He handed her a blanket and nodded toward the small room at the back. "There's a bed in there. You'll be safe." Lydia hesitated, then whispered, "My father said no man wants what I am." Cole's eyes softened. "Your father's a fool." She didn't answer. She walked slowly toward the room, the floorboards creaking under her feet. Cole watched her go, then stared into the fire until the rain began to ease. Somewhere deep inside, something shifted, a memory, a promise, or maybe just the quiet realization that his house hadn't felt alive in years. By morning, the sky was clear again. The storm had passed, leaving the plains washed clean, the earth shining with dew. Cole brewed coffee and stepped outside, letting the sun warm his shoulders. He thought of the girl asleep in the back room, wondered what her story was and why it left such ghosts in her eyes. When he went to check on her, the door was open. Lydia sat on the edge of the bed, the blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. Sunlight streamed through the window, touching her face with gold. But her expression was cold, almost afraid. On the small table beside her lay a revolver. His revolver. Polished, loaded, freshly oiled. Beside it was a note in his handwriting that she hadn't seen before. One he'd written late in the night when he realized she might not believe kindness without proof. For your protection. Not mine. She looked up as Cole leaned on the doorframe. Their eyes met. He nodded once. Nobody's gonna hurt you here, Miss Hale. Not while I'm breathing. Outside, a hawk screamed across the bright Wyoming sky, circling high above the plains. For the first time since she could remember, Lydia Hale felt the strange ache of something she'd long forgotten. Hope. The morning light came slow and soft over the Wyoming hills, spilling across the ranch like gold poured over dust. The storm had passed, but its memory clung to the land, mud thick beneath the boots, air sharp with the scent of rain and iron. Lydia Hale rose early, though sleep had been fitful. Each creak of the house through the night had made her heart jump. The sound of wind scraping the shutters, the dog shifting near the porch. She'd lived too long waiting for the next blow to fall. Cole Merrick was already outside, splitting logs with the rhythm of a man who used work to outrun thought. He nodded to her when she stepped out with the bucket, hair tied back, eyes tired but determined. Pump's down by the barn, he said, voice even. Ain't far. You'll find clean water there. She nodded, keeping her distance. The cold air bit at her fingers as she gripped the handle. The pump handle creaked. Water gushed clear into the bucket, and for a moment she almost smiled. But when she bent to lift it, the fabric of her dress slipped from her shoulder, and sunlight fell across her skin, onto a faded, ugly scar. It was small, oval-shaped, the color of old iron. Branded flesh. Cole saw it before she could pull the dress back up. His hand froze mid-swing, axe hovering in the air. She caught his eyes, hard, then soft, then filled with something she didn't understand. He said nothing. Just set the axe down slow and looked away, jaw tightening like stone. She turned quickly, clutching the bucket to her chest as if to hide the mark. The brand burned again in her mind, carrying the sound of her father's voice from years ago. You were born wrong, girl. Better to mark what's worthless than waste a pen on it. By afternoon, the ranch buzzed with quiet routine. Chickens clucked, horses snorted, the wind carried the smell of sage and hay. But peace never lasted long in places where tongues wagged faster than horses ran. In town, the gossip had already started. She's the Baron Hale girl, the grocer's wife said as she measured sugar. Her own kin sold her for scraps. Merrick's gone soft, another muttered at the saloon counter. Took her in like a stray. He'll regret it. By sundown, those whispers had traveled back through the hills. Cole heard them when he rode in for supplies. He ignored every smirk, every sideways glance. He'd lived too long to explain his choices to men who mistook cruelty for strength. When someone called after him, "You keepin' her for charity or for comfort, Merrick?" he simply said, "Neither," and rode on. That night, Lydia stood by the barn, lantern light spilling over straw and shadow. She could hear him inside, his voice low, almost broken. "Lord, help her heal," he said softly. "Help me not to scare her." Her throat caught. No one had ever prayed for her before, only about her. She stepped back, one hand pressed to the scar beneath her dress, the other gripping the lantern. Then came the sound of hooves. Faint at first, then louder, multiple riders cutting through the night. The dogs barked, their growls rising sharp. Lydia turned toward the open plain, fear blooming in her chest. The lantern flame flickered, caught the gleam of something metallic. A man at the front raised a hand to halt the others. She knew that silhouette instantly. Broad shoulders, familiar arrogance. Her brother, and in his gloved hand, folded and dry despite the dust, was a crumpled paper sealed in red wax, a contract of sale. Her breath hitched as the first horse crossed into the yard. The wind that day came in hot from the south, carrying dust and the sour smell of rain that never arrived. Cole Merrick was fixing a loose hinge on the barn door when the sound of hooves broke the quiet. They came fast and hard like a small thunder of anger. Lydia heard it too. She froze where she was folding laundry, her hands going still on a sheet that smelled faintly of lye and smoke. Cole looked up as a horse skidded to a stop in the yard. The rider swung down in one smooth motion, boots hitting the ground with the weight of bad intentions. Lydia stepped into the doorway, her heart sinking as she recognized the man. Her brother, Edwin Hale. He hadn't changed much since the day he'd left her here in the storm. Same clean-shaven jaw, same sneer that could rot wood. "Afternoon," Cole said evenly, leaning against the barn post. "You're far from home." Edwin didn't bother with pleasantries. He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded paper, and slapped it against Cole's chest. "I'm here for what's owed." Cole didn't move to take it. "You might want to explain that." Edwin's eyes flicked toward Lydia, standing just behind the door. "That right there, Pa's property. You've been keeping her without paying her keep. Pa figures $300 ought to cover the years of wasted feed and shame she cost him." Lydia's breath caught. "You can't—" "Quiet," Edwin snapped. "You got no voice in this. You're barren. You cost the family enough?" Cole finally took the paper, unfolded it slow. It was a crude contract, smudged from travel. Ink bled in the creases. At the bottom, in thick, clumsy letters, her father's name stood beside an uneven scrawl. An old family mark burned into the paper with a branding iron. "Looks official, don't it?" Edwin said, grinning. "Says right there, you keep her, you pay. Or she comes home. Either way, she's ours till the debt's done." Cole's face didn't change. He walked to the porch, set the rifle he'd been cleaning onto the table, and chambered around with a smooth, patient click. Then he set it down beside him, not pointing it, just close enough to mean what it meant. "Ain't no man owns another's soul," he said quietly. "Not in my house," Edwin laughed. "You think you're some kind of saint, Merrick. She's broken goods. Ask anyone in town. Can't give a man a child. Worthless as a dry well." Lydia's eyes filled. Her hands twisted together, knuckles white. "Then why," she said, her voice trembling but clear, "why am I still bleeding every month?" The world seemed to stop. Even the wind fell silent. Cole looked up sharply. Edwin's grin faltered. "Just for a second." "You lying witch?" Edwin spat. Cole stepped forward, slow but certain, like a man crossing the last few feet before a duel. "You had your say," he murmured. "Now get off my land." Edwin took a step back, then another. "This ain't over. I'll bring the sheriff. He'll see that paper. Law's on our side." Cole reached past him, took the contract from the table, and without a word dropped it into the fireplace. The paper curled and blackened, ink twisting into smoke. The last line of her father's name vanished in flame. Edwin's face went red. "You'll regret that, Merrick." He turned, stomped out, and mounted his horse in one motion. "You'll pay, both of you." Cole watched him ride off, jaw tight, the firelight flickering against the rifle beside him. Lydia sank into a chair, shaking. "He'll come back," she whispered. Cole nodded once. "I know." He stood, walked to the window, and looked out across the open plain. Down the road, barely visible through the dust, Edwin had stopped beside another rider, broad-shouldered, with a badge gleaming faintly on his chest. The sheriff. The sound of hooves came again before noon, slow and deliberate this time, too steady to belong to Edwin Hale. Cole Merrick was chopping wood by the trough when he heard the horses and looked up. His heart sank a little when he saw the badge glinting on the man's chest. Sheriff Walt Briggs. The sheriff swung down from his saddle with the quiet weight of a man who'd carried too many burdens, dust rising around his boots. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his mustache thick and silvering at the edges. A friend once, maybe still, but friendship didn't mean softness in these parts. He took off his hat, glanced toward the cabin, then back at Cole. "You got yourself in trouble again, Merrick?" Cole set the axe aside, jaw tightening. "That depends on who's talking. Edwin Hale. He's been in town flapping his gums about how you stole his father's woman. Says you burned his contract." Cole's eyes narrowed. "That contract was filth. Man can't own his kin, Walt, you know that." The sheriff sighed, dusting rain off his hat. "Law don't much care what's filth or fair. Just what's written down. You can't just take another man's woman, Cole." "I didn't take her," Cole said, voice low but firm. "I saved her." There was movement by the doorway. Lydia stood there, pale but defiant, her hands clasped in front of her. She'd been listening, maybe from the moment the hooves started. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Sheriff Briggs, please, my father sold me like cattle, branded me when I begged to stay." The sheriff looked at her then, and his weathered face softened, but not enough to change the law. "Miss Hale, that's a cruel story, but cruelty don't rewrite paper. You got any proof?" Without hesitation, Lydia reached for her sleeve and pulled the fabric down. The scar glared in the sunlight, ugly and deep. Briggs looked away, swallowing hard. That ain't lawful proof, miss, not in this county. All it shows is sin. Cole stepped forward, voice steady as a drumbeat. Then let the Lord and the land be witness. I'll pay the Hales their damn debt, every cent. But she's not going back there. Briggs studied him for a long moment. Wind tugged at his coat, the dry grass whispering around them. Finally, he exhaled. Fine, I'll write it up that way. But I'll tell you this plain. If you don't make her your wife before the week's out, they'll use that gap to drag her home again. Paper or no paper, marriage is the only thing the court won't challenge. He put his hat back on, mounted his horse, and said over his shoulder, You always did have a way of finding trouble in a skirt. When the dust from his horse finally settled, silence filled the ranch again. Lydia was still by the door, her sleeve down, her eyes on Cole. He didn't meet her gaze at first. He went inside, poured himself a glass of water, and stared out the window at the wide, unforgiving sky. He could feel her presence behind him, small and unsure but waiting. He turned then, voice rough but gentle. I ain't the kind of man to make promises he don't mean. But this'll keep you safe. Keep them off your back. Lydia's throat tightened. You're talking about marriage, he nodded. Ain't for love. Not yet anyway. It's for protection. I'll make it legal if you'll let me. For a moment she just stared, searching his face for cruelty and finding none. Her hands trembled as she stepped forward. You'd do that for me? Cole's eyes softened. No one deserves to be owned, Lydia, least of all you. Her hand shook as she reached for his. Then, yes. The lantern between them flickered once as their fingers met. Her touch light as wind, his steady as earth. Outside, thunder rolled far off across the plain, the sound of an old world dying and a new one, uncertain but real, beginning to breathe. The wedding took place 3 days later under a sky as pale as milk, with the wind running low across the sagebrush. There was no choir, no flowers, no crowd of well-wishers. Just Cole Merrick, Lydia Hale, and the preacher who owed Cole a favor for pulling him out of a snowstorm 2 winters back. The chapel was little more than a clapboard box with one cracked window, sunlight slanting through in broken gold stripes. The air smelled of dust and candle smoke. Lydia stood at the front, her dress borrowed and a size too big. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. She wasn't sure if it was fear or disbelief that after everything, she was standing there about to take vows meant for love but spoken out of mercy. The preacher cleared his throat, his voice gravelly but kind. Do you, Cole Merrick, take this woman to be your lawful wife? Cole's answer was simple, steady. I do. And do you, Miss Lydia Hale, take this man? Her throat caught on the words. I do. There was silence except for the wind scratching at the door. When the preacher said, You may kiss the bride, Cole only bowed his head, touched his hat brim and whispered, Ma'am. It was more respect than any man had ever given her. By the time they rode back to the ranch, the sun was setting, the whole horizon washed in copper light. Lydia rode side saddle behind him, holding the reins of her own horse for the first time in years. The silence between them wasn't cold. It was cautious, like 2 people standing at the edge of something too fragile to name. At supper, Cole said little. He passed her bread, poured her coffee, asked if the ride had tired her. Every word came with careful distance. He slept on the porch that night, leaving her the bed. When she woke in the gray dawn, she found a note on the table. Going to check the north fence. Don't worry if I'm gone past sundown. Days turned to weeks. Lydia started to move through the ranch like she belonged there. She learned which gate stuck, which horse liked apples, and how Cole took his coffee, strong and black. She sang under her breath when she swept, small tunes she hadn't dared hum since childhood. Every now and then, she caught Cole watching her from across the yard, his face unreadable. One afternoon, a calf slipped through the fence and Lydia ran after it, laughing breathlessly as it bolted across the pasture. When she caught it by the halter, Cole was there watching, a rare smile tugging at his mouth. You got a knack, he said quietly. Animals trust you. She smiled back, then quickly looked away. That night, for the first time, she sat beside him on the porch. The stars were thick overhead, the kind that made the land feel endless. She told him pieces of her story, how her father's new wife had hated her, how the family doctor had lied about her being barren just to please them, how they'd branded her like cattle to prove she was spoiled stock. Cole's fists tightened on his knees. He didn't curse or rant. He just said very quietly, You deserved better. She looked at him then, eyes shining in the lamplight. You think I can ever be whole again? He met her gaze, his voice a low promise. You already are. For the first time in years, Lydia laughed. It was small, shy, but real. A week later, she laughed again, this time when a colt nuzzled her hand and sneezed hay all over her dress. Cole laughed too, the sound rusty like it hadn't been used in a long while. But peace never held long on the Wyoming plains. 2 weeks after the wedding, Lydia was in the barn brushing the mare when the world tilted. Her hands went numb. The brush clattered to the floor. She barely had time to whisper Cole's name before darkness swept her under. He found her minutes later, lying in the straw, skin pale, heartbeat faint. Panic gripped him as he lifted her, shouting for water, for breath, for God himself. The doctor from town came riding fast, hat askew, bag in hand. After what felt like forever, he stepped out of the bedroom, wiping sweat from his brow. She'll live, the doctor said. And Merrick. He hesitated, a slow smile creeping onto his face. You best get ready for sleepless nights. She's with child. Cole stood frozen. That can't be right, the doctor chuckled. She's near 2 months along. Strong heartbeat, too. Guess her family doctor didn't know as much as he thought. When the door closed, Cole sank to his knees beside the bed. Lydia's eyes fluttered open. She saw his expression, part awe, part terror, and reached weakly for his hand. Guess the good Lord had his own plan, she whispered. He held her fingers, calloused against fragile skin. Maybe he did. Outside, the sun slipped behind the mountains, painting the land in red fire. For a brief, fragile moment, the ranch felt alive in a way it never had before. But as Cole looked out the window, he saw a line of dust far off on the horizon. Riders. Distant but coming fast. The world he knew never gave blessings without testing them first. The sun rose hard and bright the next morning, turning the Wyoming plains into a sea of gold. A warm wind swept across the grass, carrying the faint hum of crickets and the far-off call of a hawk. For a few brief hours, it almost felt like peace. Lydia moved slow but steady, the doctor's words still echoing in her mind. She'd thought her body cursed, broken beyond repair, but life stirred inside her now, a secret rhythm she couldn't stop feeling. Cole didn't say much that day. He worked the fence line, fixed the pump, hammered loose boards, anything to keep his hands busy while his mind turned circles. When he came back toward dusk, she was standing by the corral, one hand resting on her belly, the other brushing a stray curl from her face. He stopped in his tracks. You shouldn't be out here in this heat, he said. She smiled faintly. I've lived through worse than the sun, Cole. He couldn't argue with that. They stood together for a moment, watching the horses move through the dust, slow and graceful. You told me once the Lord had a plan, he said quietly. Reckon this must be it. Maybe, she whispered. Or maybe it's his way of saying I wasn't broken after all. The words hung between them, soft and trembling. Then the sound of hooves shattered the quiet. Cole's head snapped up. 4 riders were cresting the ridge, their silhouettes sharp against the setting sun. He felt his stomach drop as he recognized the man in front, Edwin Hale. Lydia went pale. He's back, she whispered. Cole's hand went to the rifle leaning by the fence. Stay inside, he said. The riders thundered into the yard, dust rising around them like smoke. Edwin swung off his horse with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Well, ain't this a fine picture? Heard the Barren girls found herself a miracle. Guess the good Lord don't mind whores after all. Lydia flinched, but Cole stepped between them, his voice calm but iron. You keep that mouth shut, Edwin. Edwin laughed. What? You think a wedding band changes the truth? That's my father's property carrying your bastard now. Cole leveled the rifle, not at his chest but at the ground between his boots. This land ain't yours, and she sure as hell ain't your father's. The other men shifted uneasily. One of them, a younger ranch hand from town, spoke up. Easy, Merrick. We just came to talk. Then talk fast, Cole said. Edwin held up a paper, edges creased and dusty. Proof, he said. Pa drew up a fresh claim. Says that baby proves she's still part of the Hale line. That means anything born of her belongs to him. You think you can just marry her and steal our blood? Cole's jaw tightened. You walk away right now, Edwin. This'll go easier for everyone. Edwin sneered, folding the paper back into his coat. You always thought you were better than us, Merrick. But I'll tell you what, you're gonna learn. A Hale always collects what's owed. He turned his horse and spat in the dirt. See you soon. Sheriff'll know by morning. When the riders disappeared into the horizon, Lydia sank onto the porch steps, shaking. Cole knelt beside her. You all right? She nodded, though her voice wavered. He won't stop, Cole. He'll keep coming until... He won't touch you, Cole said. Not while I'm breathing. That night the wind changed. The air turned heavy, the kind that carried warning. Lydia couldn't sleep. Every creak of the boards made her heart jump. She finally drifted off near dawn and woke to the smell of smoke. At first she thought it was a dream. But then came the crackle, the heat, the orange flicker bleeding through the window. Cole, she screamed. He burst through the door, barefoot, shirt half-buttoned, eyes wide. Stay inside! But she didn't. She followed him into the yard, coughing through the haze. The barn was ablaze, flames licking the roof beams, horses screaming inside. Cole ran straight into the inferno without a second thought. Lydia tried to follow, but the heat forced her back. Cole, she cried again, tears streaking through ash. Inside, he tore at the locks, kicking the stall doors open, shoving frightened animals toward the exit. Smoke clawed his lungs, fire biting at his skin. One beam cracked, fell hard, catching his shoulder. He grunted, dropped to one knee, and for a moment everything dimmed. Outside, Lydia's world tilted. The flames roared higher, lighting the night like a demon's sunrise. Without thinking, she grabbed a soaked blanket from the trough, covered her head, and ran straight into the burning barn. The heat was unbearable, but she could see him, half buried, fighting to crawl out. She reached him, coughing hard, voice breaking. Cole, get up. He tried to push her back. Get out, Lydia. Not without you. Together they staggered toward the door. The roof groaned, and for one terrible second, Lydia thought it would crush them both. Then the wind shifted, blowing a hole through the flames. Cole wrapped his arm around her, dragging them both into the cool night air. They collapsed in the dirt, coughing and gasping. The barn burned to its bones behind them, the horses safe but the rest gone. Lydia clung to him, sobbing. His skin was blistered, his breathing ragged. I told you to stay put, he rasped. And I told you, she whispered. I'm done being someone who waits to be saved. He tried to smile, but pain stole the expression. Guess we're both stubborn. By the time the first light touched the horizon, the barn was nothing but ash. Cole lay on the porch, his arm bandaged, his face pale. Lydia sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his. The baby's heartbeat fluttered faint beneath her palm, a fragile promise against the dying fire. But across the valley, riders were already gathering again, smaller shapes moving in the dawn haze. The Hale family wasn't done yet, and this time they wouldn't come with words. Dawn crept slow across the ashes. The smell of smoke still clung to everything, clothes, hair, skin, the earth itself. Lydia Hale sat on the porch steps with her hands trembling in her lap, staring at what was left of the barn. The blackened beam stood like the ribs of a dead beast creaking in the morning wind. Her face was streaked with soot, her eyes swollen from crying. Inside, Cole Merrick lay on the bed, pale and still, his arm bound tight in clean cloth. The doctor had done what he could before riding off to town for more supplies, leaving Lydia alone with silence and dread. The man she'd come to trust, the man who had fought fire and hatred both to protect her, was barely breathing. She sat beside him, her hand resting over his. His skin was hot, feverish. The words slipped out of her before she even realized she was speaking. You can't leave me, Cole, not after everything. Her voice cracked. Not when I finally found someone who saw me as more than a curse. Outside, hooves broke the quiet again. Lydia froze. She rose, stepping to the window. Sheriff Walt Briggs dismounted in the yard, his face grim. Behind him came 2 deputies hauling a wagon, and on that wagon a tarp-covered body. Lydia's heart lurched. The sheriff saw her in the window and called up softly. Miss Merrick. There's news. She stepped out, squinting against the sun. What is it? Briggs nodded toward the tarp. Found him by the river at first light. Bullet in the back. Edwin Hale. Lydia's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, God. Briggs watched her closely. Word in town says your husband had words with him last night. That true? Lydia shook her head hard. Cole didn't. He was here. The fire, he nearly died saving me. Briggs rubbed his jaw. Maybe so. But the Hales are spreading talk. They're saying Merrick shot Edwin, burned the barn to hide it. They're calling for his arrest. Lydia's pulse quickened. He didn't do it. I swear it. I believe you, Briggs said quietly. But I'll need proof before the rest do. He tipped his hat. I'll keep the body in town till we sort this out. You stay close. Lydia turned to him, eyes blazing. And I'm the only one who can prove it. The next morning, she rode back home, wind tearing at her hair. She found Cole sitting up on the porch, weak but awake. "You shouldn't be out of bed," she said, breathless. He looked at her with a faint smile. "And miss you riding like the devil's on your heels?" "Not a chance." She dismounted, knelt beside him, and pressed her forehead to his. "I know who killed Edwin," she whispered. "Your name's gonna be cleared." He stared at her in disbelief. "You can't go back there alone, Lydia." "I have to," she said. "If I don't, they'll hang you for what you didn't do." He tried to rise, but pain dragged him back down. "At least wait for the sheriff." "I won't wait for anyone." She saddled her horse again before dawn, heart hammering, fear curling with resolve. By midday, she was standing on the porch of the Hale homestead, the place that had once called her defective, branded her like cattle, and sold her to survive. Her father opened the door, older now but still cruel in the eyes. "You got some nerve showing your face here, girl." Lydia looked him dead in the eye. "I came to tell you the law knows the truth. Edwin's dead because of you. That mark on his wrist proves it." He laughed, a sound cold as winter. "You think anyone will believe the word of a branded woman?" Behind her, the crunch of boots sounded on the dirt. She didn't have to turn to know who it was. Sheriff Briggs, with 2 deputies at his side. "Oh, I think they'll believe me just fine," Lydia said. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small charred scrap of paper, the remnants of the old contract she'd found half burned in the ashes. "You branded me property. You made me proof." Her father's smile faltered. The sheriff stepped forward, voice firm. "Jacob Hale, you're under arrest for murder and unlawful trafficking." The old man backed away, fury twisting his features. "You'll pay for this, girl. You and that bastard you married." Lydia didn't flinch. "No, Pa," she said quietly. "We already have." As the sheriff's men dragged him away, she stood still on the porch, wind tugging at her hair. The past she'd carried like a chain was finally breaking, link by link, but the cost wasn't over yet. She looked down the long road home, where smoke still rose faint from the burned barn, and a man waited who might not live to see justice done. She whispered to the wind, "Hold on, Cole, I'm coming home." The courthouse smelled of sweat, dust and old pine when Lydia Hale stepped inside. The whole town of Laramie had turned out to see the spectacle, a branded woman, the so-called Baron Hale girl, standing trial to defend her husband against her own kin. The benches creaked under the weight of whispers. Men spat tobacco and leaned forward, hungry for scandal. Women stared at her swollen belly, some with pity, others with disgust. Sheriff Walt Briggs sat near the front, his badge polished, his face unreadable. Beside him sat Cole Merrick, pale and thin from the fire, his arm still bound in a sling. He shouldn't have been there. He was too weak to ride, let alone stand in court. But he had insisted. "If they're going to say my name, I'll be there to hear it." At the front of the room, Judge Hardin rapped his gavel against the desk, the sound sharp as a gunshot. "Court is now in session. Case of Merrick versus the state, concerning the alleged murder of Edwin Hale and the unlawful possession of one Lydia Hale Merrick." Lydia's father, Jacob Hale, sat on the opposite bench. He looked smaller than she remembered, but his eyes still carried that same venom. When the judge called his name, he rose with a practiced bow. "Your Honor, that man stole my daughter and killed my boy. He burned the barn to hide the evidence," the crowd murmured. Lydia's hands tightened around the folded scrap of charred paper she kept hidden in her pocket. The judge turned to her. "Mrs. Merrick, your testimony?" She stepped forward. The floorboards seemed to hum under her boots. Her voice was quiet at first, but steady. "My husband didn't kill Edwin. He nearly died saving me that same night. The man who killed him," she looked straight at her father, "was sitting at that table." Jacob barked a laugh. "You got proof of that, girl?" Lydia nodded. "I do." She reached into her pocket and unfolded the blackened paper, the remains of the contract her brother had brought weeks ago, the same one Cole had tried to burn. The edges were curled, but enough words remained. Lydia Hale, property of Jacob Hale, to be transferred or sold for debt of $300. A ripple went through the crowd. Lydia held the paper high. "He didn't just sell me, he branded me. Like an animal, look." With a shaking hand, she pulled down her sleeve, exposing the scar on her shoulder. The room went dead silent. Even the judge looked away for a heartbeat before regaining his composure. Jacob sneered. "That proves nothing. A daughter's lies mean less than the dust on my boots." But Sheriff Briggs stood then, holding up a sealed envelope. "Actually, Judge, we've got more than her word. Found this on Edwin's body." A letter from Jacob Hale himself threatening to take back what's mine if Merrick don't pay. Signed and dated the day before the fire. The judge's brow furrowed. He motioned for the bailiff to bring it forward. As he read, the tension in the room thickened. Jacob's face turned red. "That letter don't mean nothing," he growled. "It was just talk." The judge slammed the gavel. "It means plenty when your son ends up dead and your daughter bears your mark like a slave." Jacob rose, shaking with rage. "You think you can take her word over mine? She's filthy. Cole pushed himself up from the bench, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Enough," everyone turned. He stood barely steady, his face pale but his eyes burning. "You say she's broken, but she's the only whole thing I've ever known. You tried to crush her spirit and she still found the strength to love. That's more than you or any man like you'll ever understand." The room fell silent again. Lydia's throat tightened. For a moment no one moved. Then Judge Hardin spoke, his voice firm. "This court finds Jacob Hale guilty of unlawful trafficking, assault, and perjury. The claim over Mrs. Merrick is hereby voided, and her husband cleared of all charges." The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the hall. Jacob lunged forward, roaring, "This ain't over!" But the deputies seized him, dragging him away as he shouted curses into the air. Lydia didn't flinch this time. She watched him go with her chin high and her hands steady. When it was over, she turned toward Cole. He looked like he might collapse, but he smiled through the exhaustion. She walked to him, knelt and laid her forehead against his. "It's done," she whispered. He exhaled shakily. "You did it, Lydia." "No," she said softly. "We did." Outside, the crowd spilled into the street. The sun was fierce and clean, burning away the last traces of smoke from the old fire. Cole leaned on her arm as they stepped down the courthouse stairs together, slow but unbroken. Then, just as the wind shifted, Lydia felt something, an instinct honed by years of fear. She turned her head toward the edge of town. A lone rider sat on a horse near the ridge, watching them. The glint of sunlight caught something in his hand, a gun barrel or maybe just metal. The figure lingered a moment longer, then turned and disappeared into the dust. Cole saw her face pale. "What is it?" "Nothing," she lied softly. "Just the wind." But deep down she knew the world didn't let go of its ghosts that easily. Still, for the first time in her life, she didn't feel hunted. That night they rode back to the ranch under a sky filled with stars. The land stretched wide and endless, the wind warm against their faces. Behind them lay ashes, judgment, and blood. Ahead, something like freedom. A year passed before the land healed from the fire. The grass grew back slow and stubborn, green threads pushing through the black earth like forgiveness after ruin. The new barn stood taller than the old one, its boards pale and clean, its roof bright under the summer sun. Lydia Hale Merrick, no longer Hale and never again someone's property, stood in the doorway, rocking her infant daughter in her arms. The baby's name was Hope, and she had Cole's steady eyes. The world outside the ranch was quiet that morning. The wind hummed through the cottonwoods, carrying the smell of rain far off in the west. Inside, the house was alive in a way it had never been before. Soft coos, the scrape of Cole's boots on the porch, the gentle clink of dishes as Lydia set down the baby's bottle. Cole came in from the field, had low hands calloused and sunburned. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her with a faint smile. "You ever get tired of watching her breathe?" he asked. "Never," Lydia said softly. "Every sound she makes feels like proof," he nodded. "She's got your stubbornness. And your eyes." They shared a small laugh, the kind born from peace, not joy alone. The kind you earn. By noon the sky darkened, the kind of dark that didn't bring thunder but memory. Lydia went out to feed the chickens when she noticed something strange. The barn door hung open. She was sure Cole had latched it that morning. The horses were restless inside, stamping and snorting. Then she saw it. Burned into the new barn's fresh wood, black and crude, was a mark. A brand she knew too well. The Hale family's old cattle mark. The same symbol her father had pressed into her flesh all those years ago. Her breath caught. For a moment the ground seemed to fall away beneath her. She turned, her voice shaking. "Cole!" He came running from the field, rifle in hand, eyes sharp. When he saw the mark, his jaw hardened. "They were here." "Who?" "Don't matter who," he said, his voice low. "What matters is they want us to know they ain't forgot." Lydia looked at him, fear flickering at the edges of her calm. They won't stop, will they? Cole laid a hand on her shoulder. They can carve every fence post from here to Cheyenne. Doesn't make 'em owners again. He looked around at the rebuilt ranch, at the child sleeping inside. This is ours now. She stared at the brand one more time, her heartbeat steadying. Then she did something that made him blink. She walked straight up to the scarred wood, grabbed a bucket of whitewash and painted over the mark in smooth, even strokes until nothing but clean white remained. When she turned back to him, there was steel in her eyes. Let 'em try, she said quietly. We live free, not in fear. Cole watched her for a long moment, pride softening the lines of his face. You always were stronger than me. Lydia smiled faintly. No, you just gave me room to remember I was. The next morning they hitched the wagon and rode out to the old Hale ranch. It sat abandoned now, fences broken, shutters hanging loose, the fields overgrown. The land that had once been her prison was nothing but dust and silence. Cole hammered a single post into the ground at the gate. On it he nailed a wooden sign carved by his own hand. The letters were rough but clear. This land is claimed by love, not blood. Lydia stood beside him, hope cradled against her chest. A hawk circled above, its cry sharp against the wind. You think they'll see it? She asked. They already have, Cole said. She looked up at the hawk, watching it glide higher and higher until it disappeared into the sun. Let 'em watch, she whispered. They turned their horses toward home, leaving behind the ghosts that once ruled them. The wind followed, warm and restless, but it carried no fear this time, only the sound of freedom settling over the plains. The years rolled on like the Wyoming wind, slow, steady, and full of whispers. The land healed, the people changed, and time softened the sharp edges of the past. The Merrick Ranch thrived, rebuilt not just in timber and sweat, but in the quiet strength of two souls who had walked through fire and come out whole. Cole Merrick sat on the porch one golden evening, his weathered hands resting on his knees. His hair had gone to gray at the temples, his face carved with the kind of lines a man earns through storms and mercy both. The sun hung low over the hills, setting the fields ablaze with light. From the barn came the sound of laughter, Lydia's voice, low and warm, mixed with the bright giggle of their daughter, Hope. He smiled to himself. Never thought peace could sound like that, he murmured. Lydia came up the path, her dress brushed with dust, her hair pinned back in the practical way of ranch women. She looked older too, but her eyes, those green, defiant eyes, hadn't lost their fire. In her hand she carried a stack of papers tied with ribbon. What's that? Cole asked. She sat beside him, setting the papers on his lap. Applications, she said. For the schoolhouse. They're letting me teach the girls now. Reading, writing, even horse care. Cole chuckled softly. Teaching them to shoot too? She grinned. Only if they're worth teaching. He leafed through the stack, his rough fingers brushing the paper edges. Never figured you'd want to stay in this dusty valley. Lydia gazed out at the horizon. This land gave me everything. Took nearly all of it first, but gave it back the right way. I figure I owe it something. Inside, Hope squealed with laughter as she tried to chase one of the barn kittens across the kitchen floor. The sound made both of them smile. Cole leaned back in his chair, exhaling long. You ever think about it? How it all started? Lydia nodded slowly. More than I should. Some nights when the wind hits the roof just right, I still hear that wagon, the one that brought me here. She paused, looking down at her hands. Back then I thought the world had ended. Turns out it was just beginning. He reached over, taking her hand gently. You gave this place a soul, Lydia. Before you, it was just a ranch. Now it's a home. She looked at him, eyes soft. You gave me back my name. That's more than most men give their wives. He squeezed her hand, then looked toward the horizon where the sun was sinking. You ever think God gave you a curse? He asked. She thought for a long moment, the evening light gilding her face. Once, she said finally. But now I think he gave me a delay so I'd find you. Cole smiled, the kind that comes from deep peace. Reckon that's a fine way to put it. As the sun dipped below the ridge, the world turned bronze and quiet. Lydia rose, brushing dust from her skirt, and went to call Hope in from the yard. The little girl came running, curls wild, clutching a wildflower in one fist. Mama, look, she said proudly, holding it up. Lydia knelt, tucking the bloom behind her daughter's ear. Pretty as a promise, she whispered. Cole watched them both, his heart full in a way he couldn't name. The wind moved through the wheat fields, making them shimmer like waves of gold. From the far hills, the sound of a coyote carried low and lonely, a reminder that the world still had its wild edges. When the first stars came out, Lydia joined Cole again on the porch. Hope slept in her arms, a small, peaceful weight. The sky stretched wide and endless, the kind of sky that made a person believe in second chances. Cole looked at his wife and child, the flicker of the lantern casting soft shadows across their faces. "Some wounds don't make you barren," he said quietly. "They make you bloom." Lydia smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then we'll keep blooming, Cole Merrick, long as this land remembers our names." He wrapped his arm around her, the night warm and still. The wind swept across the plains, through the tall grass, over the house they'd built from ruin and love, carrying their laughter into the stars, and in that endless, forgiving quiet, the ghosts of the past finally let go.